Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to today's webinar. 2023 is already flying by, and we couldn't think of a better way to kick off the new year than to share with you our Connecting the Dots US report, all about exactly what Americans will be thinking, feeling, and doing this year. My name is Laura. I'm our Consumer Trends Manager, and I lead the US Trends team here at GWI. And I'm also joined today by Elise, who is one of our amazing trends analysts.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in today.
And this is what we have in store for you today. A jam-packed session covering all 5 of our US-specific trends. Today is going to give you all the necessary details that will put any company 10 steps ahead. Each topic has data from our unique data sets, including our American-specific study, GWI USA, and our monthly Zeitgeist research.
We've got lots to cover, so before we move on to the research, we'll give you a quick overview of who we are. For anyone who's unfamiliar, GWI uses audience insights to answer the questions every business has about its customers. Powered by consistent data that represents the views of 2.7 billion people in 50 countries, our platform is an on-demand window into their world, painting a picture of what people everywhere think, feel, and do. We make our global data available through our intuitive subscription-based platform, which allows teams to dive in and cross-analyze different data points and audiences to better understand consumers.
And in the US, we cover all 50 states. We have 210 designated market areas, and our USA survey has an annual sample of around 80,000, which equates to roughly 240 million connected consumers. So what this means is that we're really able to tap into the US consumer across a wide range of demographic backgrounds. And our USA survey is filled with a broad range of categories. So we not only get to ask questions about attitudes and interests, but we can also dive deeper into consumer needs across multiple industries. Our questionnaire content is tailored to the American market, covering a broad range of internet users. And our survey also contains a set of multicultural questions shown to only Hispanic, Black, African American, and Asian American respondents. So now that you know a little bit about us, let's dive into the biggest consumer trends for 2023 in America. And I'm going to let Elise do the honors of introducing our first US trend.
Welcome to the new American dream, where Americans are striving for simplicity rather than luxury. Across virtually all areas of our research, we see signs of Americans lowering their ambitions, trading an appetite for success for more modest goals. Or while there will still be some post-pandemic splashing out, 2023 is likely to see similar changes in spending habits and in the general culture as we observed during the Great Recession. So here's the deal. Americans are getting worried about their financial security. 51% of consumers believe that the US economy will get worse in the next 6 months, and confidence in personal finance looks to be waning too. Consumers have become more price conscious about everyday expenses, and since this time last year, use of apps to track spending has increased by 9%. So it looks like budgeting is back on the menu. With all of the worry surrounding finances and the economy, we're seeing how this is manifesting itself and how Americans think about themselves too. This chart here shows how Americans are beginning to see themselves as less sophisticated, less trend-focused, and less bothered about showing off. Year on year, some of the biggest decreases we've seen are a 13% decrease, and consumers agreeing they like to be the center of attention, and an 11% decrease in those agreeing they're influenced by what's cool and trendy.
So this is key for brands to understand in 2023, especially in luxury and premium sectors. When times are hard, status symbols change. High-end brands won't be able to rely on their logo as much as they used to. We've seen an 8% drop in Americans wanting brands to be exclusive since last year. As consumers lose confidence in the economy, brands that build trust with customers become even more appealing. The retailers that look set to stand out are those that prioritize building on trust, continue to innovate, and drive empathetic, value-add messaging.
Seeking the simple life has manifested itself in a number of ways, but one in particular is how we're seeing Americans make big changes to their working life. While consumers still value a workplace where they can challenge themselves and progress, as you can see in this chart pulled from our Zeitgeist study, when we asked consumers what the most important things to them in the workplace are, they overwhelmingly said salary at 75%, followed by work-life balance, benefits, and paid time off.
So it's clear that boundaries are being set and career goals have been changed to fit the I work to live, not live to work narrative. And with good reason, as US workers face some of the highest levels of burnout and being overworked. Time away from a traditional 9 to 5 has allowed workers to explore other options as well, with the number who work while on the road or traveling increasing by 38% since Q3 2021. So the search for the simple life is as much a cultural trend as it is an economic one.
The lockdowns reminded consumers of how important personal relationships are. 34% say that being present for family and friends is their most important goal in life, an increase of 7% from last year.
One thing to remember here is how much the after effects of the pandemic are still having on how people prioritize their life and their job, and the balances that they're finding between both. The important part of this sentiment is the word present. Being present requires mental focus and attention, one of which consumers are keen to harness in 2023. And speaking of mental health, our next trend takes a look at not only how we can expect consumers to further reprioritize what, when, and how much they buy, but also how they choose to find catharsis from the world, which is impacting what they watch and what they listen to.
To understand consumer shifts and their media consumption, we can look at how they're embracing the alternative and their interests too. Americans' trust in traditional institutions, religion included, is starting to wither away as they face a new set of problems after emerging from the pandemic. In Q2 2022, Americans have taken a greater interest in looking up to the stars for guidance and answers, or at the very least got familiar with the phrase, Mercury is in retrograde. Spirituality and meditation also received greater interest, with apps like Headspace and Calm seeing more downloads. Podcasts have been gaining popularity since before the pandemic. Listeners tune into their favorite shows to drive to work, clean up the house, and even fall asleep to. True crime is quickly coming up the ranks as a favorite genre among listeners. Did you know for the first CrimeCon in 2017 saw 800 fans packed into a hotel, and in 2022, the event saw 5,000 attend, and now has plans to go international, and there's even a cruise ship in works.
And we're not surprised by this. While the subject matter may be morbid, it makes sense why Americans are so drawn to it. They can release their emotions, maybe even feel a sense of relief when the perpetrator is caught, or at least escape reality for a little bit. Even as we've seen consumers debate the ethics of potentially glamorizing true crime or even sensationalizing the narratives, it's a fact that true crime sells and it's captivated many Americans. We can see that growth of interest in our data too, with a 21% growth in Americans listening to true crime podcasts since Q2 2020.
Much of the situation Americans find themselves in is out of their control, but they can choose what they watch or listen to. This chart looks at audio listeners and the reasons why they choose to listen. Over half of Americans say they listen to audio, whether that's music, podcasts, or audiobooks, to help them relax. And over 1 in 3 say it helps release stress and anxiety. With mental health increasing in importance, consumers are turning to the media to help them through the day.
And mental health is a really key underlying factor here within this trend. With all that's been going on for the last 2 years, Americans desperately need catharsis and a way of releasing or at least managing the frustrations that they're feeling.
And this sentiment is also translating into what Americans watch too. So another way Americans are finding release is on the big screen. Action and superhero movies are at the top, and this isn't a surprise as Marvel movies have made over $10 billion in the US box office, and Marvel accounts for 4 of the 7 most watched shows on Disney+. Americans see their action shows and movies as a cathartic experience, knowing goodwill almost always overcomes evil, but still they're kept on the edge of their seats. On the small screen, viewers have been steadily losing interest in the news. With the economic and security crisis going on, Americans are trying to avoid it and any anxiety it may bring on, a feeling they all know too well.
So in the last 2 years, music has gotten aggressive, and it's another way we've seen Americans finding some kind of relief from the stresses of their lives. Some of the fastest growing genres in the last 2 years are metal and punk, alongside high BPM genres like house and techno. Meanwhile, the genre falling most in popularity is acoustic singer-songwriter, which notoriously sits on the quiet side of the volume dial. Fans of metal and punk, as it happens, are 15% more likely than the average American to agree that mental health is important. So headbanging, as it turns out, is cathartic. And it's another aspect where we see mental health becoming this really prominent topic within our Connecting the Dots report. Mental health is top of mind for a lot of American consumers, and we're seeing this play out in areas too, which you'll see in our next trend.
Next up is the exhausted states of equality. If you didn't catch our global CTD webinar where we introduced this trend with our guest Elise James de Cruz, the Chief Equity Officer at the Ad Council, then you're in luck, as the emotional labor of the last 2 years has taken a toll. Interests in equality, social issues, and volunteering are in decline. According to our data, fatigue is replacing the fighting spirit. Since 2020, the key theme has been, we need to do better. But as other priorities weigh on their minds in 2023, consumers will be increasingly tired of hearing that message from brands. They will want evidence that brands have actually created change for America.
So just 36% of Americans believe progress is being made on social justice issues in the US. The last 2 years have been emotionally charged and challenging. In May 2020, the Black Lives Matter protests in response to the murder of George Floyd left a deep impression in America and around the world, but those frustrations have begun to take a toll. In the report, we see data that shows 62% of US consumers care about the impact of social justice causes. But then when you couple that with this 36% here, you really start to focus on the key messaging, that impact is a really key factor and consumers feel that more needs to be done. So this is really demonstrated here using our monthly Zeitgeist survey. This chart highlights a few separate studies we've run since 2020. At various social justice moments within America, we've asked consumers about how they want brands to approach these social justice causes. And this chart highlights the overturning of Roe v. Wade, Pride Month, and Black Lives Matter. What this chart shows you here is that over time, consistent sentiment emerges, and it's one that's focused much less on brands producing social media posts or changing their packaging or logos. Those ideas, as you can see here, are the least important to consumers. And this reminds me of the webinar that I presented last year that focused on the LGBTQ community, which you can find on our YouTube channel if you'd like to listen back to that recording. But I spoke about a New York Times article that at the time had highlighted the volume of memes during 2022's Pride Month, where individuals in the community were using humor to question the norms around the corporate sponsorships of Pride Month. And I think we've all seen it, right? Those corporate initiatives that have become so commonplace, but then they're equally in the firing line. And for some within the LGBTQ community, this can also be an opportunity to highlight what brands are actually doing for the community outside of those annual Pride campaigns. And that's just one example. So in 2023, consumers are going to want brands to start shifting their focus to what has been important to them time and time again. Assistance, education, and taking a look at your organization itself. As you can see here, that is what matters most to consumers, not just what products you produce or what you post on social media.
Our GWI USA dataset was first in the field during Q2 2020, which was during the height of the Black Lives Matter protests. And so at that time, as you can see on this chart, that ranking number one for consumers' brand priorities was social responsibility. But in the last 2 years, we've seen this drop to third place. So here again, we see this idea of fatigue setting in. But even though being socially responsible has dropped in consumer priority, this doesn't mean brands are devoid of responsibility. Supporting diversity and equality in the workplace is the fastest rising brand initiative. Predominantly led by younger generations, we've seen increases across all racial and ethnic demographics. And it's an example of an area where brands can begin to enact real change. Strong messages of support can be a good start, but walking the walk is the more pressing issue, according to consumers.
And this is why putting out statements for self-serving reasons can be actively harmful. 46% of US consumers are tired of hearing about social justice causes all the time. We've seen how brands can play a dynamic role in social justice causes when they follow through on their public acknowledgements. And advocacy indicators like the Black Dollar Index and accountability measures like the Accountable Allies Project by Data for Progress are still every part as valid as they were 2 years ago for consumers to account for brands on where they stand. But brands need to think long-term and much more holistically about their efforts within DE&I. Results and successes take time to build and cut through the noise. Less talk, more action. It's such an obvious statement, but one that continues to be top of mind for consumers. Whenever social justice has been on the agenda in the past few years, consumer sentiment towards brands has been consistent. Now, this is our last stat from this trend, but one we've included here because I think it's a really interesting takeaway from this trend to leave you with. 47% of Americans say poor treatment of staff would discourage them from buying from a brand.
This is crucial for brands to remember because it solidifies the consumer sentiments around supporting diversity and equality in the workplace. 29% of Gen Z and millennials want a working environment that makes them feel like they're contributing to society. So the challenge for brands now is to transfer their accelerated efforts from 2020 into supporting their staff and supporting what DE&I looks like in their organization. Alongside a decline in social issues, our research suggests that in 2023, while most Americans view climate change as a real threat, they want to stop hearing about it. They will still expect brands to take action, but will be less likely to want to hear about it in the news and on social media. If things don't change, we're likely to see more climate doomism, which is when people believe the battle against climate change has already been lost.
And this chart here really amplifies what we mean by this idea of climate doomism. Concerns about climate change have remained stable over the past 2 years, but the number who think that climate change will get worse in the next 6 months has significantly increased. And I'm sure many of you listening are familiar with that feeling that it can be really draining when you put personal effort into helping the environment and you're consistently flooded with news articles and information that continues to show how little environmental progress has been made. And what this chart shows us here is that people feel that the situation is getting worse, but their levels of concern aren't increasing. So there's that doomerist mindset. The personal effort isn't meeting the expectations of improvement. So we're seeing consumers become desensitized to the problem.
To add that, we have a possible recession in the pipeline. And if the economy goes into a downturn, evidence suggests concern for the environment goes with it as consumers prioritize other things. Our work data also shows that businesses' biggest challenge this year will be less about becoming more sustainable and more about managing the economic climate. Many Americans are feeling overwhelmed right now, leading to a greater sense of fatigue, especially when we're exposed to constant pressures. While Gen Z are the most concerned about the future of the environment, they're also more likely than millennials to be tired of hearing about it. They're a good example of how concern can spill over into the climate doomism. Both brands and news publishers have a part to play in managing people's feelings towards the environment in 2023. Our research shows that corporations are more trusted than the government. If they're able to do positive things when politicians can't, it may help break through that doomerist mindset.
So like I mentioned before in the previous trend, poor treatment of staff is one way to discourage consumers from buying from your brand. But there's other factors at play here too that work their way into this doomer narrative. Greenwashing is a great example of where, again, we see that kind of meaningless messaging from brands that is actively harmful. In this case, because it perpetuates that desensitized feeling towards climate change. While the sentiment might not be the top reason in this chart, still over a third in the US would be discouraged from buying from a brand if they made false sustainability or environmental claims. Journalism also folds into this. With so much doom and gloom in the media, it's unsurprising that it's impacting people's outlook. So to combat this, research has shown that readers actually value more solutions-oriented journalism, especially where the environment is concerned. So one way to really combat this is to shift your perspective here again to focus on that action part of what you do as a brand, or how you focus your attention on climate change towards active change. That is what is going to be top of mind for consumers in 2023. Okay, so we've made it to our last and final trend from our US Connecting the Dots report. And of course, we couldn't not talk about how we'll see shifts emerging in virtual worlds this year.
In 2023, we'll see this enter a new stage, as increasingly popular virtual worlds like Fortnite and Roblox provide more tools for identity play. This isn't the first time we've seen interest in these types of cyberspaces, though. The online chat rooms called The Palace and Second Life really paved the way for Fortnite, Roblox, and Minecraft. Drawing on some clues from internet history, as well as what we know about the people who currently use these spaces, here's what you should know in the year ahead.
So we've done a few studies over the last year that focused on the metaverse, people's awareness of it, how they would use it, for example. But one of the main themes we see consistently is the way in which people are really keen on exploring their identity in these virtual spaces. 76% of Americans who are interested in creating an avatar say they'd like to customize its physical appearance. Understanding users' avatars may reveal a lot about the individual. Each represents a different part of the person's personality and lifestyle, whether it's a mood, an interest, a social role, or their beliefs and values. For Americans, customization is key to this, and it's a main motivation for users to participate in the metaverse.
Expanding on customization, consumers want to feel connected to their avatar through their own expression. In proto-metaverses like Roblox, you can display your identity through not only avatars, but props of varying sizes and types. You can express, highlight, and develop particular interests and life experiences. It's what Second Life brought to our attention all those years ago, where users could design and build their own experiences within a virtual world. The benefit of these environments is their open social design, where personal and group identities can draw on fantasy as much as reality. We also found in our data that 62% of potential metaverse users say using the space to browse or shop for products is of interest to them, with clothing and outfits their priority, ranking above art and collectibles, real estate, and cosmetics. This demand has been seen before. At its peak, Second Life had a vibrant economy with millions of US dollars in monthly transactions and 230,000 user-made items being bought and sold each month.
However, what brands need to consider in 2023 is that although interested Americans want to browse for products in the metaverse, when it comes to identity play, it's not their priority. Selling a branded t-shirt in a virtual world isn't enough, and giving the users tools to become whoever they want to be with the freedom to change is the real currency. So hopefully by now you are armed with so many incredible insights for your business to take on into 2023. And I know we've covered a lot today, but before you leave, here are our top takeaways from today's webinar.
We first looked at how Americans have fashioned themselves a new dream based on the realities today. Within our trended data across several industries, we observed this mindset seeping into every aspect of their lives, from attitudes towards career goals to auto and fashion purchases to the importance of family. It's not necessarily a culture shock, but more like a culture shift. It's the new American dream given our current circumstances, one where consumers have become more content with modest ambitions, and brands must follow suit. Next, we looked at how Americans look to the media to give them some hope and, at the very least, an outlet for their emotions. Nearly half of consumers indicate they watch content as an escape or diversion. Americans are watching TV and movies to distract themselves from what's going on away from the screen. Some old favorites will continue into the new year. Marvel movies are scheduled out to 2025, while true crime will benefit from a podcast market expected to grow 31% annually to 2030. Other things like new age spirituality, high BPM music, and rom-coms could represent new arrivals, bubbling up from subcultures and fandoms.
Our third trend looked at how fatigue is replacing the fighting spirit. What success for social justice looks like in 2023 is going to be about how brands need to understand what's truly important to consumers to succeed. Action, education, meaningful impact. Remember, 62% of Americans care about the impact of social justice causes, but just 36% believe progress has been made. And alongside that, the fastest rising brand initiative is to support DE&I in the workplace. So how you create impact in your organization is going to count too. And you may risk being left behind if you don't support those critical DE&I roles and initiatives. And fatigue is also present with attitudes towards the environment. Repeated exposure to climate change is causing doomerism. Brands, marketers, and journalists are going to need to combat this desensitized feeling that consumers have towards repeated exposure to a pretty depressing news cycle.
And finally is the metaverse's impact on personality. While it's important for brands to be on trend, creating experiences and products with widespread benefits will help keep large numbers on their side as the metaverse develops. Brands should also know that success in 2023 means ensuring the needs of all potential users are catered for in the metaverse, especially internet users who aren't yet eager to participate due to their lack of representation. Going forward, the focus needs to be on enablement and creating the tools for users to be whatever version of themselves they choose, with the ability to change.
So that wraps up our jam-packed webinar about our Connecting the Dots US report. And if you made it to the end of today's session, a huge thank you. I know we've both just thrown a lot of information at you. We'll be sending you a copy of today's presentation as well as the recording, so you can send it to a colleague perhaps if they couldn't join today's session, or for you to recap in your own time. And if you're actually thinking that wasn't enough information, you can read about each of these trends in much more detail on gwi.com. Just head on over to the resources tab and click 2023 trends. And you can take a look through each trend on our interactive microsite, as well as get all of this content in a downloadable PDF.
And if anyone has any questions about these reports, or would like more information about what we do here at GWI, please feel free to reach out to our emails, which are on the screen now. Thanks, everyone.